Well, computer would be easier,
You
but
are-
if I have to, I can.
No, you're,
My cell phone, but the problem is my cell phone, the coverage here is really spotty.
let's see if he can hear you.
Marty, you there?
No.
Okay,
Hi.
he just said he said he's got me here, but we don't have audio on.
But
this
you
thing.
do, because it's not muted. I can see that. Yeah.
Well, I'll keep.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Harding, you got a signal? It's an Apple 7 or the home line. We have a home phone too, which has much better.
Okay. Lee, do they want you on this or do they want you on the phone?
Which number would I call, David?
Here's my phone.
Right.
You're on my phone.
How's everybody?
No, I don't. Yeah, if you just give me the number, yeah.
I think we're looking good. David, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you give Warren a call? Did you talk to her?
I did talk to her, yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay. So if I call that number, that'll hook me up to the audio portion of this. Okay, well, cool. Well, thank you. Appreciate your help, David. Thank you.
You should see if those two things work.
You can hear them now.
Okay.
What do you want?
Well, nothing now.
Well, what are you doing?
I guess we'll try it through this.
Can they hear you?
The mute
I thought
and
you had to call them.
video, the line's gone.
Yeah, okay.
Ask them if they can hear you.
I think you're fine. Leave, I might need that.
You don't.
So
need-
Hardy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
We can
Okay.
hear you. Can they see you?
Can you
I'll be
see
right
me?
back.
We
I
can
can
see you.
too. Yeah. Hi. I'll be right back. I just have to grab something real quick.
I look very blue.
That's because you are.
My white balance is weird somehow.
Nice wind chimes, Lee.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
This
but
is
I only
very-
see half of your face.
Well, that's all right. You'd be better off if you didn't see my face. How you doing?
Good, good.
Good, okay. So I guess this is working. I was,
Move your camera so your whole face is in the picture. There you go.
Over here on the side.
well, we can see it all now. That's
No,
fine.
you're not looking at the camera. It's
What
over.
hand is that?
My wife, she knows how to do this stuff.
No,
I
wait,
don't.
the camera is,
Look, we know you're technically challenged.
Well, that's true when it comes to
that's
this,
for
I-
sure. Okay, the camera's just over there somewhere.
That's all right. They can see me good enough.
You're good, Lee. That's perfect.
See, I told you, I'm computer savvy now. All right.
You're gonna wait till you make sure this works, huh?
I can leave.
You think?
Yes, she has. Lynn, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Lynn, this is Lee. Will this scroll back to Hardy when he starts the meeting?
When he talks.
Do this. You go, then you can see everybody.
No. Got it, okay. Morning, David.
Haley,
David, you're blue.
I know, it's kind of like if I get back more in the general direction of the sun, it's okay. It's just weird kind of where I'm
It's
sitting.
okay if you're blue. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Blue is okay.
Just looking at it, that's how they see you, so you've got to figure out how to.
What is that?
Well, maybe more shape than I am. That's better, a little.
I turned on a light.
Well, there's an idea. Yeah, that's better.
Here's Mark. Hey, Mark. Flying his airplane.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
What does owned and fee mean?
Owned in what?
Owned and fee, F-E-E. What does that mean?
I'm not sure what that means. What's the context?
It was in that thing. That thing. That's a question for Hardy.
Hmm.
Hey, David,
Yeah,
is this 510-769? Is that actually your phone number?
it is. Please don't
Okay.
say it because we're streaming live on
I'm
YouTube.
not going to say it out loud. I just want to know if you actually are a Google nut, because that's what it told me.
Lauren, are you in Hawaii? Are you? No, you're at the lake. You're at Lake Tahoe today.
Yeah, but it's Cinco de Mayo, so
Oh, everybody can meet virtually for virtual taco night.
yeah.
Hardy, what does owned and fee mean?
Owned in fee?
What does that mean?
Fee simple or owned in fee means total ownership and control of the property and the structures on the property. It's used in reference to property that doesn't have encumbrances from things like easements, like conservation easements.
Okay. I'm waiting for the donuts.
Oh, that's a good point. We don't have any breakfast this morning.
No.
Hey, there's Mark. I haven't seen Mark for like 2 weeks. Mahalo, aloha.
Aloha.
What's that on your face?
Morning, Lynn.
What's that on your face?
Oh, yeah, I haven't.
What is
shaved.
this?
I just haven't shaved I only shave now once every 10 days since I'm not coming into the office.
Saves razor blades. It's a good look.
So I'm going to make everybody aware that what you're saying here on this meeting is going out into the World Wide Web over YouTube, and anybody can log into that if they know how to find it, which is posted on our website. It's really the same as the board meeting that people tune into on TV. So just be aware that anything you say on here is going out to anybody and everybody in the universe, which is fine. I just want to remind everybody.
So I can throw my cat around then.
Thank you, Hardy.
Lee, you're out of the picture again.
You can hear me though, right?
Yeah, but I gotta see you. Gotta read lips.
To work? Cool.
No, they can't. I'm not. I'm trying to get on the agenda here. Yeah, they can. How's that? Now they can. No, I couldn't get it all. No, I didn't.
Hey, Lauren, do you know if we, do we have any absences that we know of today? Or are we expecting?
Stacy Caldwell is doing a radio interview, I think, during the 9 o'clock hour. She said that she's going to sign in when she's done. She didn't quite know the exact time of it on Friday when she emailed me. She didn't know if it was going to be in the beginning or in the middle. If it was in the middle, she was going to sign on and then leave and then come back.
Got it.
And then Kat said she would be here. So
Cool.
Lauren, your hat keeps going away.
I know it's
It's like, what's up with the hat?
it's the virtual background. I have wood walls, so it like blends in.
How funny.
Yeah.
Does everybody know how to mute themselves for when you're not talking so we can hear people talking?
And minimize background noise, huh?
I'm just thinking like once, I mean, not now, it doesn't make any difference. Once we get the meeting started, if you put your mouse over your picture in the upper right, you should see a button that, or a little.
But there's down the lower left on my screen is a
Okay.
mute button.
Perfect.
Yeah, it depends on what device you're using. If you're using a laptop, it's the lower left. I think if it's an iPad, it might be an upper right.
Good morning, everybody.
Hi.
Morning, David.
Hey. Oh, Lauren, I like the hat. Are you actually outside? Or is that 'cause you're sitting on a dock?
It's fake news.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. What do you think? Should we give Kat another minute or get going?
No, we have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we have 4. We could start.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. Let's call this ACAT meeting to order for May 5th, 2020. Do we, standing orders to call the meeting order. We're going to waive the Pledge of Allegiance because we are virtual. And then let's do a roll call.
Member Golden,
Present.
member Larson,
Present.
member Lorenz,
Here.
member Caldwell's excused absence. We'll be calling in late. And then member Rolfe is absent, and Chair Diamond
Is here. Okay, all right, sorry about that.
Oh, there's Catherine.
Oh, she's coming in.
There's Cat. I see Cat. And a cat.
Hey, Kat, we just got going, so
Okay.
you're now officially here.
Yes.
So, special orders of business. Does anybody have any comments on the agenda or anything that they'd like to change or modify?
Just a quick comment. Lauren's going to open with the virtual piece. I just want to remind everybody on this call that this is going out into the World Wide Web on the universe of YouTube. So anything you say on this meeting is going out and being broadcasted. And then also, I may mute you from time to time if you forget to mute yourself. So just be aware that if you're not being heard or you feel like you're disconnected, to look for your little red icon. If it's got a slash through the microphone, that means you're being muted. You need to click that so that you can talk and we can hear you. And I'm going to do my best to manage the Zoom meeting and the presentations, but we're just going to have a little patience. This is the first time we've done this.
Okay, and the other thing that is just that we've got an order that we're going to ask people to speak in, which is myself, member Golden, member Caldwell, member Lorenz, member Rolfe, and member Larson. So when we get to a situation where we actually need comment, we'll go in that order. So help me remember that if we get to that
Could
point.
you do that again, please?
So yeah, the member, as an example, right now, we're asking for if there's any modifications or comments on the agenda, and the order for those comments are myself. I have no comments on the agenda. And now we'll ask member Golden if he has any comments or modifications to make to the agenda.
I have no comments.
Okay, member Caldwell is not here. Member Lorenz, any modifications?
Negative.
And member Rolfe?
No modifications.
And member Larson?
No.
Okay. All right, so any special orders of business from staff?
No.
Beyond that, okay. And do we have any public comment? Or actually, maybe we should just talk about how the public comment is being managed. Is that the text messages are going to David, or who's receiving those?
That's right. They're going to me. I've got no public comment at this time.
Okay, and just so those watching know, if you text messages to area code 530-205-8603, then we will receive them in the meeting here and try to address those. the context of the discussion. So, okay, item G, consent items. The minutes from the March 3rd, 2020 meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at those, and do we have a motion to accept them?
I'll make a motion to accept them.
I'll second that.
All right, a roll call vote.
Hardy, you have to go through.
For us.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll do your roll call vote. Member Chair Diamond,
Approved, yes.
Member Golden,
Present.
Member Caldwell, absent. Member Lorenz,
Aye.
Member Rolfe,
Aye.
Member Larson.
Abstain.
All right, so moving on to item H2, the virtual minute guidelines. Through that.
Yeah, it's mine. So has everyone had a chance to read the staff report about virtual meeting guidelines? Yeah, all right.
Yes.
Yeah. So the governor was passed an executive order, specifically N29-20, that loosened some Brown Act requirement rules regarding having a physical place for the public to meet and for elected officials or appointed officials to meet. So he has allowed us to meet virtually without violating open meeting laws. We have to, in order for us to meet, we have to make a public URL link available for any public member to watch and participate. And they can supply public comment via any sort of electronic way that we choose, i.e. a call-in number, a text message, an email, and we chose to do text message via the district cell phone, as it allows for up to a minute. Like, there's no delay in receiving a public comment. We reviewed that number earlier in the meeting. David Van Quest is manning the public comment. Under each specific agenda item, we have to ask for public comments. We already do that normally, but David, you'll ask DVQ, is there any public comment? And David Van Quest will check the phone, and he'll say, and we could ask the public to be like, we're addressing this item. If anyone has any public comment, please text your public comment to that cell phone number. And then when we get to the public comment section, that's when we would ask, and DVQ, if he has any, he will read them at that time. I created a list of ACAT members to go in order, just so we're not talking on top of one another. It adds clarity and efficiency and kind of order in this new way of doing meetings. It also makes it easier for me to know who's next when I'm taking the minutes, so I can see who's talking when. Luckily, I get to see all of you. You aren't using phones, but sometimes people will use the phone to call in for the meeting. So having a list and some order helps me with my minutes. It also helps the viewing public knowing who's talking and when the next member is going to make a comment. I think that's it. I mean, everything is posted on our website, on the agenda, and on the ACAT page. If you have any questions, let me know. As far as everyone was able to sign on. So that's half the battle, is getting us all on here.
Job well done. Thanks, Lauren.
All right, thank you, Lauren. So we'll move on to item H3, the Trails Project update. As a reminder to the public, you can text message comments to 530-205-8688. 803, and we will we'll review those comments at the end of the discussion. Who wants to start with the Trails project update?
I can give a backstory. There's two phases to the Trails project. Phase one was a Trails master plan that was completed in 2016, 17 timeframe. Phase two was an enhancement of the Trails master plan, specifically designed to look at connecting existing trail structures that happen around town through airport property. That was one objective. The other objective is to make community connections and inroads to organizations, municipal, private enterprise, whatever, who are engaged in constructing and connecting trails. Foundation led the charge on that. And that would be a good example would be North Star, NCSD, the town of Truckee, and JMA Ventures, people who are actually actively engaged in constructing trails. So that was the other objective. The first objective was to figure out how to connect existing trails. The second objective was to find the players in the arena of trail construction locally. And one of the other objectives of the phase two plan was really to understand the financing landscape, or understand how to get funds and leverage dollars that flow through the town of Truckee, both Nevada and Placer County, to assist organizations such as the Truckee-Tahoe Airport District in constructing or being a partner in other trail construction activities. And then the fourth objective was really to understand what legal instruments were required for the airport to engage deeper on trails. And that would be things like a conveyance of public use easements and access points, so that trails could access across our property, but also across neighboring properties. So those four objectives are what we tasked the Truckee Trails Foundation, which is our ACAT's prime contractor in that project, with doing in that phase two. So the phase two report has been sent out to the Trails Ad Hoc and CAT. I drew attention in my email to the last page, which talks about significant next steps for the Trails project. Phase two, you could probably call it phase three at this point, I would guess. So that's the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of it. On the ACAT board side, Chair Diamond mentioned to the board at the last board meeting that we were thinking of either sunsetting the trails or trying to read the tea leaves, so to speak, with the board to figure out if there was interest in continuing activity with the trails. So that's the backstory update. As the staff lead on trails, I'm happy to help in a number of different ways. I'm also connected in trails wearing a different hat within the community. So I can also give you kind of the landscape on where trails are headed from a community perspective with the town and the counties, et cetera. There's a lot of activity in that arena right now. And Truckee Trails Foundation specifically has grown a lot recently. They've gotten a couple of really major grants to do long-term trails maintenance, which I know will make Mark happy, because he was one of the impetuses that drove those organizations into doing some maintenance of particularly the Legacy Trail that's so important for us. So that's what I have as far as the backstory on the trails portion.
Okay, Lee or Kat, do you want to discuss this or comment on this, or let us know what your next steps are, or what the plan is at this point?
This is Lee. Thank you, David. Thank you, Hardy, for that. My only thoughts on it, as we mentioned in the last ACAT meeting, that we should concentrate on the portion of the trail that would connect the regional park area over to the trailhead that leads up towards North Star, and really look at that. I don't know if we would sunset the other positions regarding a trail system all the way around the airport or not, but we could certainly put that on the back burner. And as we'd all kind of looked at before, we should look at that one portion of the trail that would connect regional park over to the North Star trailhead. Thank you.
Kat, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just think
came up in the last meeting, I believe, and I think the general feeling was that there's so much activity going on with other organizations and with the possible land swap with the sanitation district, and that I don't think we necessarily wanted to sunset this committee, but just to put it on the back burner and see what other organizations were going to be doing and how, and then revisit it later and see how the airport could fit into what else is going on. Am I correct in remembering that discussion?
I remember that discussion. I also remember the last time there was a kind of a task order out there for me to get connected with the new buyers, with the buyer and the seller of the triangle parcel that restricts our access to connect those 2 points, which I've done. But I think I'm to the point on that project where I'd like to hire a professional to help me navigate the county, the buyer, the seller, the escrow process, and figure out the seller is willing, discreet person who didn't really want to get thrown into the public arena as far as issuing a trails easement for the airport. But basically they told me they're happy to give us an easement or sell us an easement depending on how it affects the valuation of the parcel. So I'd like to spend, less than $5,000 to finish that. If you're serious about connecting those 2 dots, that in my recommendation, that's the next hurdle that we have to cross, is really getting a definitive agreement in place for looking closely at that easement.
But that, Hardy, so if you did that, if you spent the $5,000 on that, then would the next step for that be that we would need to get funding from the board?
I think the next step would be, have a really candid discussion with the board and figure out, do we want to take that and package it up as a clear legal path of a legal trail path, essentially deed access through that portion, and offer it up to the town and the Truckee Trails Foundation, the airport, and any other partnership, possibly JMA Ventures, that they're actually trying to get money from us to help them pay for their trail, but try and wrap it up, so to speak, and offer it up as a potential connection point, and maybe even NCSD. I think that was really the goal that I've heard from Kevin Smith, is that the district as a whole doesn't really want to engage in constructing trails. It wants to be a catalyst for connecting dots. If you look at the map of the Martis Valley, the airport separates every head in the valley. So the airport really is the hub of all trails in the Martis Valley proper. So I think it's money well spent, it's time well spent to get that last piece that would connect the Legacy Trail to North Star. I think that's a really good thing to work on. I think it's tangible and it's doable. I think it's for not a lot of investment, we can make some headway there. That would be my next step. And then to answer your question, I think you would need to have a conversation with the board and figure out, what do you want to do with that access point and that deeded access through that triangle parcel to the NCSD trailhead.
Okay, so just so for me, just so I understand, so there's for about $5,000, the next step for you is to get the information that you need, and that we would then take that information to the board and ask the board for additional funding to move forward.
Yeah, I don't think it would be, I don't know if it would be 5,000. I just used that figure because that's a service contract agreement that I don't have to go out to bid for. So it would be considered a small purchase under our acquisition policy. So it would be some amount less than that to hire a real estate professional to help me navigate all of those different moving parts. Just dealing with Placer County in that particular area, because that's a state highway with state highway setbacks, I'm going to need a fairly significant amount of time from somebody in the real estate world to help me unravel those restrictions on that parcel. And it's in escrow and so on and so on. There's complications there. But yeah, I think that would be my recommendation to the group. If you want to continue forward, it's not going to take a lot of horsepower from ACAT, but I'd say 2 to 3 months, I could come back to you with hopefully something in my hand that shows that we've connected those dots or offered that option for the board of directors and ACAT to consider.
And if you went down that road and did that, would the information that you acquire from that still be valuable in like 6 to 9 months in case the board doesn't want to fund anything for a period of time? In other words, I guess what I'm asking is it prudent to do that right now, and that we would have that information for when the board is ready to move, if they choose to move on forward in the future? Or would it be better for us to delay that process for 3 to 6 months or whatever and pick up again later because the information would be different at that point in time? Or what's your feeling on that?
I'm not totally sure if I can answer that right now. I mean, my hunch would be that because it's in escrow, that the buyer and seller, it would be a good time to work on that easement work together. So I think if you did the legwork to get involved in an easement and connected with the new owners of the property and got that ball rolling, particularly with the county and the state, which can have really long, they can really jam you up, and it can be, their timelines can be very long. My recommendation would be start on it now. And then by the time that the board of directors and Kevin Smith and ACAT figured out that they wanted to agendize it and have that discussion, maybe an answer there for everybody.
Okay. Do you need an action on us to do that, to approve anything, or you've got everything you need to continue?
I would say if you want me to take that, I would make a motion to spend less than $5,000 on a real estate professional to support the trails, call it phase 2.5 for the easement work. And that would be enough to get me started. And then I'll give you an update a month from now when we get to the next ACAT.
Okay. Does anybody want to make that motion?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hardy, maybe I misunderstood or I didn't catch it. So the board has some bandwidth for this, zero bandwidth for it, or a lot of bandwidth? And the reason why I'm asking is before we go out and expend any more resources on this, is this even something the board has time for?
I can answer what I know, and that's the trails were a focus of some of the strategic workshops and some of the board work a couple of years ago. It hasn't been talked about much recently, but again, Chair Diamond talked to the board of directors and tried to take a temperature. And one of the board of directors said, he said, I for one am interested in continuing our work on trails. That's what I can answer and what I understand about the board's directive with trails. I think if there was an organization or a consortium of organizations that would help us work together to complete a trail section, I think the board, that's a clear win for the airport and a clear win for the community and the board. So I don't see why they wouldn't support that. I don't believe that our board is going to take major amounts of money and put it into trail construction.
Okay. Yeah, I support it, but I just didn't want ACAT to kind of be running around on an initiative that the board is lukewarm about. And I'm kind of thinking of the community development recommendations that we made earlier in the year.
All right.
Understood. Back burner the entire topic until you had time to sync up with the board at a higher level. I would respect that as well. Take whatever guidance you may have.
That's what in my last question, that's what I was wondering too, is if it was better to just not spend anything more on this until we get more information. But if you're saying because of the escrow situation and because of the time that it will take you to get this information, that it might be prudent to have it on hand, then I mean, I would ask, especially members Golden and Rolf, who are on this committee, if they want to have a motion to have you continue on this, or do we feel like we want to delay this until another date? Member Larson?
I have a question. I want to be clear. This trails business is only land or that's under the airport's influence? Is that what we're talking about here? I mean, I read the plan and you know how I go. Because I know there's other trail development plans in the works now to cross the Truckee River and, you know, go do that. So I'm going to make sure that these are two separate issues, or are they? Would
That's
they-
a really good, that's a really good question. The airport is engaged on many levels with land surrounding the airport, including land swapping land with our neighbors to enhance the protection zones for the airport. So our RPZ and the runway safety areas with our neighbors to the north. So this parcel is not owned by the airport. The airport owned parcels are really easy. So those were kind of a phase one type of item. Phase 2 and phase 3 are going to be connecting the dots on non-airport owned land that are really adjacent to the airport. And that's why this triangle parcel, the airport owns all three areas of the intersection out here by Porter Simon, except the triangle parcel that prevents that trailhead from being constructed. That's why that is a subject parcel of interest in this discussion. But I will mention that airports as a whole really need to understand the land that surrounds them, because everything aeronautically speaking is controlled in a compatibility situation with the neighbors around the airport. So that's an important function that the airport plays regardless of trails.
Members Golden or Rolf, do you have, would any comment on this, or do you want to make a motion, or what are you thinking?
Member Golden here. Thank you, everybody, for your presentation. I think based on what we've heard, I would agree that we should press forward with investigating the issue with the that one piece of land, the escrow, since we have a window of time to do it. We've come a long way with this. It's been several years now, and based on what Hardy said, excellent point. I think we should move forward with this, and I don't know if this would be something that would come out of the ACAT monies, or we would have to go to the board for the appropriation of up to $5,000 for this. But based on what I've heard, I would say we should move forward with it and keep the ball rolling. Especially, like I said earlier, the segment that connects the regional park over to the North Star Trail there. Thank you.
And Member Rolf, any comment on it or motion?
Yeah, I agree with Member Golden, and I'm happy to make a motion that Hardy go ahead and spend no more than $5,000 to hire a realtor to look into the easement that would connect the airport property to the trail. What is it? The PC3 trail. So I think right now that's the one piece that we just don't have enough information about.
Just a point of clarity, the PC3 to Legacy Trail is being connected through JMA and Parks and Rec. We have a little piece of ownership that we have down there by the bike park, but the parcel I'm referring to is the triangle parcel just to the west of the Porter Simon building, which would essentially take the end of the JMA trail and connect to NCSD's trailhead.
Yeah, I understand which parcel it is. I didn't know who which
Oh,
entity.
who the ownership. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that there wasn't confusion there.
Right. And well, my understanding is that if we could use that easement for a trail, then it could come to that corner that we had talked about that we own across from Porter Simon. We could put parking area and signage and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Just for clarity of the motion, is the money coming out of the ACAT budget? Yeah.
But I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the procurement based on the updated bylaws requires ACAT. I have to read the bylaws. There's a limitation in spending directly from ACAT where it transfers over to the board to get board approval. So I need to pull the bylaws up, but I'll work with Chair Diamond on that to confirm what that is. And if it does require board approval, we'll get that on the next board agenda. And if it doesn't, then I'd like the motion to reflect that ACAT's approved that expenditure.
Oh, is that new? Oh, is that for the non-aeronautical projects?
It's the ACAT bylaws updated the procurement policy between.
Okay, do we have a second on Kat's motion?
I will second that.
All right, do we have any public comment on any of this, David?
No public comment.
Okay, does anybody, before we take a vote on it, does anybody else have any questions or comments on it? Member Larson?
May be late to the party, and I apologize, but as I read through this, it's probably real late, and maybe Kat can answer this. How does this trail project improve air quality? That stuck in my head all night long, and I thought, okay, tell me how this improves air quality.
Well, I mean, I think ultimately the whole basin trail project is designed to get cars off the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good
And
enough.
does anybody have anything else? Yeah.
All right, with no other comment, we get a roll call vote on this, Hardy?
Member Chair Diamond,
Yes.
Member Golden,
Yes.
Member Caldwell is absent, Member Lorenz,
Aye.
Member Rolfe,
Aye.
Member Larson,
Yes.
motion passes.
Yes. Okay, now we'll move on to item H4, which TK airspace and flight procedures review. As a reminder to the public, public comments can come in at text message to 530-205-8603. And do we have any comments on this before Art's presentation? Member Larson.
Yes, thank you. This is delicate and sensitive. I realize that for me. First of all, I want to kind of ask the ACAT members, when we get agenda material, do we all read it? Does everybody read it? And I don't know how you want to handle that question. But I read this document 3 times. And I could not figure out what we were being asked to do. I didn't see a proposal. And I'm concerned that Mr. Bullock will spend the next hour reading us material that I think we should have already read and had questions to ask. And it appears to me that the board as a whole has been dragging their feet on a change in departure activity. So just so that I'm clear, what I care about is what would any change to that departure benefit the community, noise reduction, and continue pilot safety. And if there are other issues going on at the airport that would interfere with any changes, I think we need to know that upfront, concisely and clearly, so that the lay people like me and Kat and who are not pilots understand it. So that's all I'm asking, is that we at least have this material come to us in an understandable way. So there, I said my thing.
Okay, if I can just comment on how we got to where we're at, that this was brought up as a proposal to recommend to the board that they at least look into, preferably adopt the approach, or excuse me, a departure off of runway 29 to the Cigna intersection, which diverts the runway traffic basically off to the left, away from the Prosser neighborhood where it's now going. And we're talking about instrument departures for the main focus of this discussion. That right now all of the instrument departures going off 29 are going over the Prosser neighborhood. So when I brought this to Hardy brought back to me that it was wise to have this conversation within the context of their greater airspace discussions, not only just this particular departure, but to understand the other things that are being considered, because it should be considered as a whole and not considered as just one part of that. I respected that because I respect Hardy and the airport, the work that they've done on this. So that was fine to me. And then we decided, based on the conversation there, that maybe in addition to just this proposed Cigna departure, that ACAT might want to have an interest or a say in the various different procedures that the airport is looking into on a case-by-case basis, so that we could have, not just today, but in the future, a presentation over a specific proposed departure or arrival route, that ACAT would look at it, ask questions about the impact on the community and the flight safety aspect of it, and then either decide that we want to make a recommendation that the procedure go ahead, that we want to recommend that it not go ahead, or that we have no opinion on it. So Hardy's presentation today, in my understanding, Hardy, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is to give us that basic overview that we need to discuss the specifics of each proposed procedure. And as we know, like, now that we are implementing ADSB, there's talk about the different procedures that we can use because we've got these new technologies, or this new technology. And so that we would get that overview today and then use as an example the Cigna departure, and that maybe the ACAT today could make a decision on if we would want to recommend to the board that with the looking into that departure as a means to relieve traffic that's heading over Prosser. Is that, Hardy, is that an accurate?
Yeah, that's a really good summary. And I'll answer for the relationship between the board and staff and ACAT when it comes to airspace and procedures. ACAT's had a long role, 20 years or so, in airspace flight procedures and ad hoc noise abatement procedures. So back when it was called the Airport Noise Advisory Committee, which I believe Galen Larson was a member of way back when, that they did some groundwork with Jeppesen to do an airspace study. So ACAT's role in recommending procedures that reduce community noise and annoyance is well-established and longstanding. So that's how ACAT's connected. The board obviously makes many directives through the general manager down to staff to work on projects. And that's where I'm engaged right now. The board and Kevin Smith gave me a directive to work on control tower, flight procedures, and airspace surveillance. So those three pieces are underway. So I can tell you what I've done, which my attempt today in this PowerPoint was really to give you a little bit of update on what's been happening, and to answer David's question, if you want to develop a new procedure, what methods are available to ACAT and the board to get that accomplished. And there's two slides on the PowerPoint. Slide number 2 and page 18 both outline the objective and then some different steps that can be taken to march toward a final outcome of procedure development. So to Lynn's point, I probably could have done better putting a slide in there like, what are we asking of ACAT today? But I think what I'd like to focus on is giving ACAT the backstory so ACAT feels informed. And then if you want to anybody can make a motion at the end of it and say, let's head this direction, then I'll welcome that too.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments on this before Hardy starts his presentation?
Member Golden here. Basically, what I'm seeing with this procedure out to Cigna, correct me if I am wrong, but this would basically be a back course thing off of the RNAV GPS Alpha that's currently charted. We'd follow the same track, correct? More or less?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, I think the first thing we should really look at with this is the safety of this procedure for aircraft with multi-engine or more. In the event of any problems, are they able to do this, make the climb gradient safely over the terrain that is charted on this RNAV GPS Alpha plane out to Cigna? Is that something they can do safely?
Yeah. So I would recommend going through the presentation first and having that discussion,
Okay.
because there's some items in the presentation that may answer that question for us.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start. You can stop me and tell me if my presentation is not working properly, okay?
Go for it.
I'm going to
Thank
share
you.
the screen here. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, thank you, Hardy.
Yes.
Okay. So the goals, I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but basically what we're trying to do is recommend procedures that reduce community annoyance, enhance safety, and promote efficiency. The last bullet, efficiency, is really important to the FAA, and we'll talk more about that later. We want to survey what's already happened and analyze some of the results from housing and land use data that we have. Flight procedures in airspace, there's always a C component from the airport with the FAA, because the FAA doesn't want to do anything without a lot of pressure and force from an airport. Visual flight procedures are a different type of procedure that we'll talk a little bit more about. And then we also want to understand that disseminating information to pilots before they get to our airport is really important. The way that pilots receive information is very structured. And so when we develop things that are port specific, like noise abatement procedures, pilots won't get them unless they come to our website or talk to Mark Covey. So that's an important note to understand, that most things that pilots get are done through official channels through the IFR or Visual Flight Procedures gateway. We want to talk a little bit about paths for special procedures and specific publications that enhance airspace use at Truckee. These are called company specials. I'll give you an example of that later when we go through here with NetJets. So these are some of the facts and just the basics related to airspace and flight procedures. The FAA controls all the airspace above the tarmac. So anything, once the wheels leave the ground, that's the FAA's responsibility and regulatory work that they enforce that. I also was going to mention flight procedures and airspace work is the most technical and complex initiative that I've worked on at an airport. And for most of the aviation professionals that I know, airspace and flight procedures are very complicated and fraught with significant issues on the regulatory side, on the environmental side, and on the political side, because they affect people's use of their private property. So I'm just going to put it out there that this is it's a long effort. It's been in play ever since I've been working at the airport, and they're significantly complicated and complex. Flight procedures are just one part of the whole airspace system. There's also the transitional system and also the en route structure. And then you get into transoceanic and all these others. So we're just a little piece of a very big puzzle that makes the national airspace system work. So when we design things at Truckee, we need to remember that they have to work as part of a puzzle that dots the entire landscape of the globe with airplanes. Flight procedures are the very first part and the very last part of an aircraft's flight into our airport. And then this is important. The flight procedures are multidimensional. So they take into account lateral and vertical guidance of the airplane with a gradient or a percentage of travel over the ground for every vertical foot it goes down. There's also reference velocity. How fast is the plane moving? Because that determines the actually the radius of the turns that the aircraft can make at a given bank angle. And it also incorporates a parameter of visibility, so forward-looking flight visibility to see the runway. So all of those things, all of that data combined will basically make the flight procedure. Airports usually don't develop flight procedures. They leave that to the FAA. Our airport has done some work in this area, but most airports don't. So as far as a project schedule goes, we're really at what's called notional design. So we're in a preliminary procedure concept. So we have preliminary procedures designed for the airport, and the FAA is aware of what we're doing. The consultant has published these and made different exhibits to show people how they work. So we're right in the middle of a project schedule. When we talked about building ADSB, I told the board that it would be 15 to 24 months to get flight procedures built into the system. That timeline is pretty decent timelines. It works faster than that in some cases and slower than that in others. But one piece, getting the airport on the same page and understanding what procedure we want to pass through is the start. And I think that's what Chair Diamond wants to talk about today. How do we get started? The public outreach component is not, it's not a soft item. The public outreach is required for the environmental process associated with flight procedures. Many airports have been sued and many airports have lost when they have consigned to or allowed the FAA to place flight procedures. A good example is Phoenix. When they put PBM procedures over a bunch of houses, they got sued and those procedures got backpedaled and removed. The National Environmental Policy Act protects the people underneath those flight paths, and there's a certain structured outreach process that goes along with flight procedures that our airport has not undertaken yet. These are some of the design criterias when you build a procedure in and out of Truckee. It's got to have environmental benefits, reduce emissions, noise, track miles, has to serve all the runways, enhance runway utilization. It's got to meet the design criteria and terrain obstruction requirements, and a number of other things. So this is what we call a notional procedure. And for some reason, the consultant attached my name to this, but as soon as it's published, we're going to put David's name on there, or Lee's name, or Lynn's name, or something. So this is an RNAV standard instrument departure. An instrument departure means the airplane can fly this when it can't see anything out the windows. So if it's snowing, the airplane can fly this. The containers you see are containers of protection. So the aircraft can travel anywhere laterally or vertically within that container while still meeting the guidance restrictions and requirements based on the aircraft manufacturer and also the FAA's ability to protect that airspace. So when the FAA publishes a procedure, what they're looking at is they're looking at two things. Can the aircraft outclimb the terrain and avoid hitting something and be protected within that container? And they're also looking at, can we protect that aircraft from another aircraft while navigating the airspace surrounding that procedure? So the aircraft flew over Truckee, near Truckee, or was established on some other type of guidance system. Could the air traffic controllers separate those two pieces of metal in the sky? And that's what the FAA considers a successful procedure, being able to answer those two questions. This is another depiction of some of the, oops. So this is a departure off of runway 20 headed out to the west towards Cigna. This is a departure off runway 29 headed out to the west towards Cigna. So you can see the ground path there. I'm going to back up and see if I can get the other video to play. For some reason, this video doesn't want to play, but basically these notional procedures and transitions, the transitions are the large lines, the procedures are the small lines. You can see that they go off every runway, runway 20, runway 2, runway 11, and 29. And so that's the goal, is really to offer up our pilot community any number of departure paths. In some cases, that'll reduce annoyance for the Prosser neighborhood that's underneath the Truck 4. In other conditions, when we have variable winds, you can get aircraft pointed directly into the wind, which is enhancement of safety. So these are the notional departure procedures that we've worked on. This is a kind of a closer view of the containers associated with those procedures. And we worked hard. The orange polygons are neighborhoods that we're trying to avoid.
Hardy, can I just pause you just for 1 second? Can you, when you're talking about the like sit on here, this standard instrument departure here, can you point out when you're talking about when we're going over the Prosser neighborhood to the Truck 4, can you point out for those who don't, because we don't really see Truck 4 labeled there. I see the little icon for it, but just so that people have an orientation of where
Yeah.
what. sorts of things you're talking about.
Can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so truck 4 goes like this. And I'm going to do the best I can to follow along here, but it basically goes like this. Goes out like that. So that flies right over the Prosser neighborhood. Here's 89 North. Here's Alder Hill. Here's Prosser. And basically, if an airplane, a jet or turboprop, most jet and turboprop aircraft require an IFR, either a standard instrument departure or an obstacle departure, one of those two procedures to leave the airport. So they file, they get a clearance, our tower clears them, and away they go to pick up Oakland Center, and they fly out like this, and they fly in this path. So there's a lot of impact on northbound aircraft on instrument flight plans over the Prosser neighborhood. I'll show you the plate here in a minute too.
How many people live in Prosser, Hardy? Do you know?
What's that?
How large is that Prosser neighborhood?
I have a graph at the end of this. We can look at it. Talks a little bit about the households out there. But from memory, I don't know exactly the number. Prosser's a big neighborhood. There's a lot of people that live out there. I know. I mean, just from my local knowledge of the neighborhood itself.
Can you hear that? that plane going over my head right now?
Yeah.
That's pretty dark. That's the second time he's gone over. Dave, do you hear that at your house? Yeah.
The guy needs to change the pitch on his prop.
This is an interesting one because it doesn't seem to be getting louder or quieter. It seems to just be like there. In fact, at first I thought it was like somebody cutting something, but yeah, it does. Okay.
One of the concepts about reducing track miles is getting the airplane in a position to make a natural approach and landing to the airport. This is the arrival side. So there's the departure side, which we just looked at the notional procedures, and then there's the arrival side of the equation. So the arrival obviously has another approach plate procedure that gets the aircraft from the en route structure into the transition and then ultimately into the approach phase and down onto the airport. One of the concepts is that you use a goalpost concept where you organize airplanes in cardinal directions around the airport in areas that reduce the residential overflight. So you put them in a natural position to make a smooth entry to the airport. Now that has to take into account a bunch of different things that I'll show you here in a minute. But we have worked and gotten feeder fixes, which are fixes that align the airplane in a natural progression to get onto the approach path easier. So that's one of the things we have been able to complete. And the Oakland Center looked at that as an airspace optimization. So the FAA says, well, we want safety, capacity, and we want to reduce passenger delay. So that's their three kind of high-ranking philosophical pieces when it comes to airports and airspace. So we got a lot of traction from them on this feeder fix concept. And I'm going to point that out here. You see that the entries that come in to the feeder fixes for Leakey intersection, which is a direct for 1-1, popular approach with jets. And then the 2-0 arrival route also got feeder fixes associated with that. You can see that here. Interestingly enough, the FAA I think it was about 7 months ago, sent me a notional procedure that they wanted to change this approach and align it directly with runway 20, making it a straight in. And it flew right over Glenshire. And I wrote them a letter and got on the phone, and I got our congressional support people involved. And I actually went to DC and talked, and I went to Renton, Washington, and talked to them and said, that procedure is not going to work for our community. So if you put that procedure in, we're going to litigate with you. We're going to work against you at every part. You can't put that in. So their answer was respectful. I thought they removed it from the workflow, and they republished what was the RNAV 2.0 approach that actually was published last week. So many people, when the publication came out last week, it's got all new waypoints. It's a completely different approach. It's laterally aligned the same, but the minima is different. So that's one of the things that airports do have to do is you have to watch your procedures, and you have to make sure that somebody within the system isn't making decisions based on what they want and not what you want.
Hardy, that 90 degrees, that's an in loop on 90
It's-
degrees.
Yeah, it's in lieu of procedure turn. And so given vectors to final, the aircraft can be put in a position where it can make that turn without having to go do the full procedure turn.
Copy.
So this is a housing analysis we talked about. We took GIS data and put it into the containers associated with the departure procedures and readjusted them slightly to understand where the best place to put the airplane would be based on the total homes, second homes and vacant homes. So this gives you a little bit of an understanding of how those procedures, how the number of households affected by the procedures. That's, I think, an expansion of the same graph. So here's our findings after we started that process and what we've gotten done so far. So certified departures off of every runway are feasible and possible, except we need to talk about what Lee was talking about, which are climb gradients. Certified arrivals are problematic based on terrain. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that and show you on the map. And then SIDS and STARS, standard terminal arrival routes and standard instrument departures, are easy to transfer between the controlling authority and the tower. So once you have a tower, they can use those and they can use flight procedures. Without a tower, we don't have any way to encourage use of any of the procedures. So if you don't have a tower, the pilot can look in his book and he can do whatever he wants. He can use whatever departure he wants. He can use whatever arrival he wants. We did an obstruction survey. Pretty cool document if you're into that kind of thing. It's very detailed and shows a lot of LiDAR surveys around the airport showing where the obstructions and where the terrain restrictions are. And the tower can promote the use of certain procedures and equitable runway use when given the right tools. So these steps on doing design work, basically we have to develop a environmental impact methodology for each notional procedure. We need to conduct targeted outreach and we need to present the results in the project summary to the board of directors and then engage our consultant and engage the FAA. So that would be the next step on the airspace and flight procedures side. And then I'm going to show you one map here really quick. Can everybody see this map? Okay.
Got it. Thank you, Hardy.
This is an exhibit that really comes out of the CLUP, the land use plan. The blue area is the airport influence area, the area that is directly adjacent to the airport. The red area is height review overlay, meaning that there's terrain in there that will affect the safe operation of an aircraft. So as you can see, the airport only has a couple of containers available to it. There's this container here, which is to the north. There's this little sliver right in here, which is basically where the truck 4 is. There's this area over downtown right here. And there's this little area out by North Star. And so I just want to give everybody an understanding of why airplanes can't fly straight down 29 or straight into different areas of the airport because there's terrain that creates a hazard to aircraft in that area. So when the FAA looks at flight procedures, they look at essentially the TERPS criteria, terminal in route procedure criteria, to understand what terrain will threaten an aircraft and how do we get around it. So right now, aircraft can approach on this green line, which is their approach to runway 11 eastbound. They can approach on this line, which is the new RNAV GPS Alpha, which is essentially the departure procedure that David Diamond and Lee were talking about, just on the inbound format.
Arrival procedure.
Arrive on the RNAV or the GPS RNAV to runway 20. as far as outbound goes, we only have two ways to get out of the airport on an instrument, SID or ODP, and that's truck 4 right here or truck 4 right here.
What happened to the Tahoe departure?
I didn't put the Tahoe on here. Tahoe 1 departure is actually another one that goes like this. If you can follow my cursor, it makes a loop like this. Tahoe 1 is seldom used, and it makes it difficult to segregate some of the Reno operations from Truckee. And so center controllers will oftentimes avoid issuing that to aircraft. So we're kind of in conversation about what that means for our airport.
Okay.
So here are the plates associated with each one of these. There's the Tahoe 1 that Joe was talking about, and here's the truck 4. And this is basically just a sheet of directions for pilots to use those flight procedures. So that is,
Sorry, Hardy, before you go away from that, can you bring
Yeah.
that one more? Because I think that the map before that actually shows a nice perspective on this, the Cigna thing that I just wanted to make clear. Yeah, perfect. So where you're at right there, if we're talking about departures off 29, so for the community members, you can see runway 29 and the direction of flight, that currently all of that traffic is following the red line. And it's based on the runway utilization data we've seen recently. It's actually, I mean, would you agree, Hardy? It seems like it actually takes a much quicker right turn because it's following the bridge outbound and then heading up that direction, but it's still in that general direction. And so when we talk about Cigna, what we're talking about is a red line that takes off that way and then turns to the left and basically parallels the green line inbound. So that's the departure that we're thinking, not to the exclusion of the red line that's there now, but in addition to it, so that the tower has the option to diversify flight paths, and also for aircraft that are heading out to the west or southwest from that departure, that they don't have to go north all the way to truck and then turn back to join the airways to get back. So it's a little bit more efficient for those flying out in that direction. And as you see from the flight track, I mean, there's certainly neighborhoods that are below that, but it's a diversification between those neighborhoods and Prosser, which is right now underneath all of that departing traffic. Would you agree with that, Hardy?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's flying out to Cigna is a great community noise and annoyance departure. You always want to put noise from an aircraft over ambient noise. And the most ambient noise our community has is Highway 80. So when you put the airplane over an emitter of ambient noise, you're doing the right thing. I've flown that departure in almost every type of aircraft that comes to our airport: King Airs, Falcon, Citation, Cirrus, Cessna, and it works really well. There's some areas that are going to receive annoyance, and that would be the area over by Pioneer Center. It's going to be ski slope, the edge of ski slope, and then it's going to be some additional downtown Truckee area residents, but they already are pretty in a kind of a high impact zone based on anything that comes off of runway 29. So I wouldn't spend much time really describing or discussing that group of homeowners, although we care about them very much, but they already are being subjected to noise no matter what airplane takes off runway 29 or where it goes. So,
and I think if I could just interject there, it's important to remember that what we're talking about with regard to a procedure is for IFR traffic. So if we're in good weather conditions and we're private pilots or we're flying VFR, visual flight rules, we can already take off of 29 and then follow the freeway to the Bay Area. So that traffic route is already being used by a number of aircraft. We're talking about here just making that an official IFR procedure so that those aircraft, which as Hardy mentioned before, include a lot of the larger turbos and jets, that are virtually always on an IFR flight plan, that they can also take that route instead of taking the route up to the right where they have to then fly back to the
That's a
other.
good point. That's a really good point. And then I wanted to touch on what Lee asked. Flight procedures are a lowest common denominator implement. So what they do is they take all the airplanes that need to fly that procedure and they lump them together. So some aircraft, some airplanes can fly just fine on one engine. If it has two engines and it loses an engine, at V1, which is the velocity for single engine climb performance for that metric, it's called a V1 cut. At the worst possible time on the takeoff roll, you lose your critical engine at gross weight. Will the aircraft perform? And that's what Lee's talking about. So, and he can tell us more about that, but really the procedure has to meet that certification criteria. Some aircraft are fine on one engine, others are not. And so when the FAA approves a procedure, it will look at the climb gradient associated with that route and figure out if an aircraft will survive a single engine, a one engine and operative scenario at gross weight. And so we can talk more about that, but that's the trick in all of this, is understanding how to get that lowest common denominator criteria met while not hitting a piece of rock. Lee, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. Good presentation, everybody. I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and the truck 4 departure, it takes you to the north, and if you look at the climb gradients on the plate, in order to, at the speed I would use, which is about 150, which is minimum speed in our airplane climbing through ice. And if we're IFR, there's always a chance of that. So typically you may be going a lot faster. And in the event of an engine failure, let's say at 150 knots, the gradient that is required on this is 415 feet per mile, meaning for every mile traveled over the ground, you got to climb 415 feet. If you look at this thing at 150 knots, that is 1,038 feet per minute up. The aircraft I fly will not do that on one engine. It'll be about 500 or 600 feet a minute up, which is enough to establish a climb out to truck intersection. And since going that way, there really isn't much terrain to speak of, the procedure is you go to truck and then you climb in what's called a holding pattern, which is depicted on the plate up to your truck intersection. And it says right here, 11,500. And what I'm saying is if you lose an engine, you're not going to make it to truck at 11,500. You'll be considerably lower. But since there's basically no terrain out there to speak of, you can safely do that. And that's why I think they put the truck 4 departure in that direction, because there's nothing to hit out there. Now, if we go the other way and look at the procedure out to Cigna, I haven't really run the numbers on it, but there's a lot of terrain out there, and we really need to look at, is it even safe to do that? And that's a big thing that, you know, all the training I've done since the 80s on this stuff in simulators, they just beat this into your head until you're blue in the face. So I think we really need to look at that on a middle ground here. Is it a safe thing to do? And we always have to think about the worst scenario here. And I'm always speaking from the term of multi-engine airplanes, because in a single, if you're doing this and the engine quits, your decision's made for you. You're going to have to figure out where to land this thing. Now, if you're in the weather, that's not a real good scenario. I know one of the aircraft operators does utilize a ballistic parachute for a safe descent in the event of a failure. But I'm really coming at this from a multi-engine perspective. So I think, you know, looking at flying out to Cigna off of, say, 29, we really need to look at that objectively and, you know, possibly get an expert in there to look at this and go, is this something we really want to even think about? And I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but I have brought this up in regards of departing off runway 11. And we personally, I've done this many times in the simulator in the King Air, and if you depart 11 and you blow an engine at V1 like Hardy had described, the chances you will not clear Brockway Summit. And we tried it, I've done it 30, 40 times. Close, but you won't make it. The prospect of turning the aircraft to avoid the terrain, it's pretty sketchy because as you bank the aircraft, you're losing the vector of lift. And it's really a bad thing to do in a dual engine procedure in a multi-engine airplane. Basically, you want to go straight ahead, fly the airplane, figure out what happened, and figure out what you're going to do with it. And I think these two departures, the truck 4 is off of runway 2 and runway 29, and the reason that they've done that, because if you do this, there's not a lot of terrain to hit. So I think we should start with that metric and then, you know, really do some real research into going off of 11 and or 29 and making that left turn going up the canyon, because there is a lot of terrain out there and safety is number one in this. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Okay, Hardy, did you have anything more in your presentation?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay, so I think just there's really two things for ACAT to decide here. One is that, do we want to make an official recommendation to the board that they take up the discussion of this alternate departure path, as Lee was saying, to put the research in, to figure out if this will work with staff, so that we can see whether we can get any traction on developing that. Again, it is not to the exclusion of the current procedure. So it's not as if people or pilots would be forced to use this instead of what they've got now. It's an additional option. Do we want to make that recommendation to the board to look into this? That's the one decision. The other decision, which is a little bit of a softer decision, is having gone through this discussion and looking at that Cigna departure, does ACAT have an interest in ongoing interest, I should say, in looking at each of the proposed procedures that staff is looking at to see whether or not we have any concerns with regard to community impact? So those are the two things that I'd like us to focus on here. Does anybody have any comments on either of those things? Member Larson.
I think we should follow our protocol here and go down the list, and then when we get to me, I will comment, but I'm afraid we were going astray.
Okay, I called on you because you raised your hand. So
well, that's why I raised my hand, so we wouldn't go astray.
Okay. All right. So Member Golden, I've said what my perspective on this. So Member Golden, do you have any comment on those two thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it wouldn't take a lot as individuals here. I'm happy to do this and run numbers on the aircraft I fly, and it probably wouldn't hurt to reach out to some of the charter operators that run the jet-powered aircraft in and out and get their take on this. And again, if we want to look at this, I think it's fine. I don't think we should really spend a lot of money on it. If we have to hire experts to do this, it could get quite expensive. And I think if we talk to the operators and get their take on this, because they fly airplanes with different performance capabilities. The airplane I fly, it performs really well on one engine, but it won't work going off a couple of these runways and or the procedure that's charted here. And so I think we got to kind of jump into that first and then work backwards. Of course, we want to spread out the noise impact on this, but we have to really remember that safety is absolute number one with this. And as the development around the airport continues in the whole area here, this is going to be a real concern here. But safety's number one. I flew in an airline for 15 years, and that they had 5 things in there, and safety was always number one. And we got to look at it in that respect, because we don't want to put anybody in a position that could be in a dire strait here by doing these things. And regretfully, when I've seen over the many years I've been doing this, a lot of people don't do their homework on this sort of thing. They just get in it and go. And if you put something out there, they'll go, oh, that's great, let's do this or let's do that. And they don't do their homework. And you got to do that. And all the formal training I've been involved with since 1985, they beat it into your head. So I think we should look at it in that respect. Let's just look at the physics involved with this and the raw data that we could certainly work with. I can work with Mark and Hardy and anybody else who flies airplanes and go over this stuff and see what we come up with. And it wouldn't cost anything. So I'm happy to do that, and I'm sure the other folks on committee, their current pilots, would want to get involved. It's always a learning thing, and I think it's really important that we look at it in that respect.
Okay, looks like Member Caldwell is here now. Stacy, I don't know how long ago you joined our conversation, but if you were privy to that whole conversation, hey, do you have any comments on those two? I mean, should ACAT have a future involvement in recommending or not recommending these sorts of things, or what are you thinking on that?
I think that number one, I would be cautious to make any business decision just because of my duty of care is being tested right now as an obligation. However, at a high level, David, I think you're absolutely on the right track in bringing this conversation up, and I would look to our pilot members to really guide the conversation. And the other thought I had listening to you was, I think if I was sitting on the board, I would want some kind of connective tissue between this conversation and the board to alert them. And I'm sure they are, from the staff, but to open the dialogue with some of the pilots that serve on the board itself, because it feels like, safety is the number one issue. It's part of our charter when we see opportunities to increase safety, to bubble those things up. And I think as a community advisory, you've taken it far enough that, I would want the benefit of some board engagement and direction to make sure, we're going down the right path for the overall organization. So, yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I would probably refrain or abstain on a business decision if it got too technical. But from the general direction, you have my support, as well as the general direction of reaching out to the board and bringing it on their radar.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Member Lorenz, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so I wanted to had some questions on some of the slides, Hardy. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll just quickly go back to that if that's okay. And you don't need to pull it back up on the screen necessarily. I've got it loaded on mine, but maybe for the benefit of others, we need to pull it back up again.
Yeah, just 1 sec.
Sure.
Got it.
So I think back towards the front of the deck, Hardy, that was the procedure concept slide. I had one of the first set of questions I had.
Right here?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So on number 2, it says serve all runways. And of course, right now, the SIDS and ODPs that we have, the obstacle clearance departures, really are only relevant for runways 2 and 29. Are you envisioning really trying to put together SIDS for 1, 1, and 2 as well?
Yeah,
Okay. And I think that goes to what Lee is kind of contemplating before about the applicability, you know, of some of the larger planes from that. And then do these SIDS require ADSB, or are they enhanced by ADSB, or this is separate from that?
that's a good question. So the issuance and the acceptance of a flight procedure is affected by ADSB. The actual flight procedure itself will take into account certain criteria for surveillance. So for example, if you open up some charts, it'll say procedure not authorized at night, procedure not authorized, radar surveillance not covered, things like that. So there are caveats in the procedure, but developing these procedures is not incumbent on nor directly supported by ADSB, except in the way that they're issued either by a control tower or a controlling authority.
Right. So that allows, you know, more than one airplane to kind of be ready for a departure or arrival, I guess. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So the next slide I had questions on was the Hardy slide. I like that departure name, by the way. We should keep it. But anyway. So, and this is probably, well, I'll skip my initial question, but, and I think I got the answer already, but that intersection to the north is, or to the west there where the two combine, that's the Cigna intersection, right?
Are you still on there?
I'm not sure. I have to look that up. I have to look at exactly where Cigna is. It's in that, that is not Cigna. Cigna is to the west and slightly to the north, but that's the connector fix that goes to Cigna.
So that would be a new fix there then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then the northern transition fix, maybe that's on the next slide. Yeah, so so is there a northern transition fix before you get to truck? Is that what's being contemplated as well?
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulty. Give me one sec.
Sure.
Okay. This fix?
No, it's more the Glenshire kind of left turn there.
This one?
Yeah.
So this is runway 11. There's going to be a fix right here as well, and a fix here. So Glenshire essentially is right in here, this area.
Yep.
So this is one of the things that when we did outreach on this procedure, the Glenshire folks had a lot to talk about with this one.
Okay, good. So it just there's a far more use of fixes on these SIDS than is currently on the truck 4.
Yeah, the truck 4 is actually an obstacle departure procedure, which has a level of fidelity for IFR use than an RNAV. If you pull up the RNAV 20 plate that I showed, you'll see all those step down transitions.
Right.
That allows it to have lateral precision or LP minima associated with getting the plane lower. So the more fixes you have, the higher fidelity and higher, the higher precision you have with the guidance of the aircraft.
Yep, copy that. Okay. Yeah, so I think that covers the questions I had on the deck, Hardy. So thanks for going back through that. I guess an analogy that I'm thinking of, bigger picture about this, is like when we put in our new fireplace and television enclosure, and that remodel requires endless compromises. You know, how high up do you want the fireplace off the floor? You know, how high, what's the space between the fireplace and the TV enclosure? Is the TV going to be too high? Is it going to be too low? Sorry for that little sidebar, but I guess it's the same kind of thing when considering kind of these instrument departures. It's an endless set of compromises that probably may benefit one community, but certainly impacts another community. And I think if we're going out to Cigna, I can virtually guarantee that left turn over Highway 80 is going to bleed into Pine Forest, and it's going to bleed into Tahoe Donner. as it currently does. I mean, if there's citations or if Surf Air is making a west departure, they're flying over my neighborhood. And so it may be great for Glenshire and others and terrific for them, but the compromise is that other neighborhoods, I think, are going to be impacted by it, as I think you pointed out, Hardy, earlier. So that's just an observation and I guess a concern as a representative of Pine Forest, I suppose. So to answer your question, David, I would say yes and yes. It's certainly something that I think ACAT needs to stay engaged with, and I think it's certainly something ultimately that the board needs to wrestle with and agree to. I think it's a great idea to be looking at various departure routes and see which ones make sense. I totally agree with Lee in terms of safety and noise obviously is very, very important in the community, but as a pilot, safety is going to be my #1 priority always. And if I can do both, I'm going to do both. But if I'm departing in crappy weather over Donner Pass, I'm going to be really worried about that, Sid, frankly. And then one last question for you, Lee, is have you flown that GPS Alpha arrival yet? And are you okay in a King Air doing that arrival?
Joe, thank you, and everybody. No, I have not, but I intend to do that. We haven't been flying the aircraft basically at all because of the current situation, but I will be happy to do that, as I did prior flying in a pattern to the proposed runway 34. So I'm glad to do that, and I'll do that and get back to you. I mean, it looks like pretty good procedure, but if you go the other way with it, you got to climb pretty good to get over to one of the intersections. You know, SD isn't very far, it's 4 miles. And then as you continue on, so you need a pretty good climb gradient if you just basically fly the reverse of this thing. And that, of course, is my concern with that the climb gradient would be such.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'm concerned. I mean, I'd like to see more heavy aircraft come in over Donner, but circle of land approaches, as I think most instrument pilots know, are pretty much the most dangerous type of arrival you can contemplate. So I could almost see that more as a VFR kind of approach than anything else. But I was just curious if your community, Lee, has expressed any particular concerns about that Alpha approach.
You mean here in Glenshire?
Well, no, just the big airplane community.
I don't know how many people have done it. I haven't talked to anybody on that. Primarily, I use the RNAV to runway 20. It works really well. Yeah, you got to go out to Awega and do that, but it's a good approach and it works well because it is basically straight. And yes, it's offset, but it's an easy approach to do.
Yeah, I agree.
I flew it in the Pilatus the other day, coming back from San Francisco, and it worked really well in a turboprop. Mark Covey and I flew it in the Cirrus like 6 times in a row. It was really hard for me to get the plane, remove the energy out of the plane. It was way too slick and way too high. We were going like 180 knots at the bottom, and I couldn't slow it down. But the turboprop can slow down a lot better, so it worked well for the Pilatus. The bulk of the aircraft that use our airport that are turboprop, excellent approach for that type.
Guys, I hate to interrupt, but I think we're getting into the specifics of a particular procedure, which is not what I think at this point in time, we just want to see if ACAT has an appetite for this moving forward. So if is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. I think that was a function of whether or not we can direct more heavy traffic out over Donner on the arrivals, and I think that being a good thing, but I understand what you're saying, so we can move on.
Anything else, Joe?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, Member Rolfe, any comments on ACAT's involvement in this?
Sorry. Hush. Be quiet. I'm sorry. I echo what Stacy said. I don't feel like I have a whole lot to contribute to this, except I would love for fewer planes to be flying over my house directly. And I would defer to the board and to the aviation people on this one.
Okay, and Member Larson?
Thank you. A couple of things. I drew myself a little picture here as you were talking, and this is a technical question. I see the proposal, let's go out this way, the departing and the arriving, and with my little arrows that I drew there, I saw a bit of a conflict. So is that controlled by the tower? Or if they're coming in and going out the same way on that proposal, it looked like, sketchy. So did I miss something?
That's a good point. The alignment of the RNAV, the alignment of the approach and the departure would be set offset. So they would separate each other. So right now we have outbound traffic on the north side of Connor and inbound on the south side. That would remain if we developed a flight procedure. That would be a requirement.
Okay, I have to agree with Joe and with Lee. Safety is a big deal here, and not just for the pilot, although it's safety for the pilots, but these engine failures where this plane lands wherever it lands. I'm thinking about the folks on the ground, on particularly that one going over town. But that's something I just don't understand. But I just have to say I agree with them on the safety issue here. But what I saw, and I think Hardy, you touched on this, essentially we'd just be moving the noise someplace else. And my question to you is, what would the additional noise impact be on the area where we move this noise off of, say, Prosser? And you say, well, yeah, we're worried about those people, but,
Yeah, one of the things that's important to understand about noise in airplanes is that if you reduce track miles, you reduce total exposure. So there's time and noise energy, and those two combined have this exposure to the people on the ground. But if you can shorten the duration and shorten the track miles and get the plane out of Truckee faster, that's why this would be such a great departure, because it's going in the direction that most airplanes want to go, which is they want to go to the Bay Area, which is southwest of here. If you put a track, you're going to reduce track miles, and therefore you're going to reduce annoyance and also reduce aviation emissions from greenhouse gases. So that's one component. But yes, you're exposing a different collection of households than you are on the Prosser side.
okay.
I think it's important to note, though, just to make it clear, 100% of the IFR traffic that departs runway 29 right now flies over Prosser. 100% of it. So what we're talking about in getting an alternate departure procedure is that this will certainly affect some households that are currently not affected by IFR departure procedures off 29. The question is it unfair to include them in this situation when we know that right now one neighborhood is enduring 100% of the traffic right now? So I think and Hardy talked to this before, you can't fly in and out of Truckee right now without flying over somebody's house. I mean, there are ways to minimize that, but even when you minimize it, it doesn't mean that nobody hears it. It just means that now you're focusing traffic over fewer houses rather than more houses. And in a way, even that's unfair, because if there's 10 houses below the flight path as opposed to 500 houses, we also don't want to unfairly burden the folks that are in those 10 houses. So one of the other advantages, other than what Hardy was talking about with that particular departure, is that airplanes are going more direct toward where they want to go, is that we can diversify these departures so that it's not one neighborhood that's getting 100% of them. Now we're splitting it up. We're reducing track miles. We're reducing the annoyance of the neighbors below. And I think a number of us, because we know that the staff is working on these procedures, hence our conversation here, is that we want to be able to think in terms of the future. We've got ADSB, the capabilities that we've not had in the past, that maybe we can sort of even it out a little bit more. with absolute, and what Lee and Joe had said about safety, this goes without question. Noise is a complete non-issue by comparison to safety, because if safety is not adhered to, the noise might be an aircraft landing in your living room, which is like the worst noise possible. So we absolutely want to make sure that this is, but again, we're talking about an alternative. We're not talking about a mandate. We're not talking about shifting. Everybody has to use this departure and everybody has to fly this track. We're saying now there's an option for pilots. So if a pilot decides that that particular departure procedure is not suitable for her or his aircraft, the other one can be chosen. And keeping in mind also that a lot of the times when we have IFR traffic, as Hardy mentioned earlier, because it's corporate traffic or jet traffic, they're on these IFR routes even in absolutely pristine weather. So it's not always just about stormy, cloudy days. It's just some of these aircraft have to be on an IFR. So that's so it sounds to me like on the second issue of, does ACAT have a general interest moving forward in hearing about these particular procedures and making a recommendation, yes or no, or we have no recommendation? It seems like folks are pretty much in favor of that. And I think on the more directive thing about, do we want to ask the board to pick up a discussion on that departure procedure, which would then include the board deciding how it wanted to go about doing the research, the safety, and all of that stuff, because really this is in their realm. It's not in our realm. It's our realm is only to recommend that they look into this or that they not look into this. That I think at that point, all we would be deciding would be, do we want to ask the board to look into this? And that, I mean, I would actually move that we do ask that ACAT does make a recommendation that the board look into a departure to Cigna off of runway 29, and that do whatever research they need to do to determine if that is a safe departure procedure.
And I
Is that a
think,
motion?
That's a motion.
That
So
was a
just-
motion.
Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it.
I have a question.
Yep, member Learn.
And I think I'm okay with the motion, but just a point of clarification, or maybe a recommendation to Hardy is that, I appreciate what David is saying with regard to having an alternate SID. I think that is a good thing. And kind of spreading out the pain is probably only fair to the community. But I guess the fact finding that I would ask the airport to do is to determine using the truck 4 departure, who's going west, who's going northwest versus who's going east, northeast. And if that number, that ratio is higher west, then one could probably logically conclude that the Cigna departure, or whatever it's going to be called, is going to be a 50-50 kind of sharing of the burden. If most of the traffic is going back to the Bay Area, now that side of town is going to be getting all that turbine noise versus the other side of town, I guess. And not judging, I'm just saying that might be a data point the board would be interested in knowing.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, we can figure that out. And I would recommend that I'm going to let you move forward with the motion, but I'll make one recommendation on the next steps when you get done with your motion.
Can I make a comment about before we vote? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, so when I first got on ACAT, I don't even remember how long ago it was, but it was a very different board. Not very different. It was a different board. And I remember the first few meetings I tuned into, there was a lot of discussion on this very subject, which was, and a lot of it was led by Mary Hetherington the last time she was on the board, about whether or not we spread out the noise. And it just seemed like it was a sort of a not contentious, but definitely there are some very strong opinions about whether we just keep the noise where it is, or if we spread it out, and does that hurt more people in the community, and how do you gauge that or even quantify it? So, and as I said, it's a different board now. So I'd be interested in just where they stand on this issue in general before we maybe look more into, spend time and energy on this particular solution or alternate route. Because at the end of the day, if they've come down on, oh no, we're just gonna concentrate it in one area because all of a sudden we're going to have all these people who've never had noise complaining and it's not worth it, then we've just spent more time on something that, we shouldn't have spent time on.
Understood.
Does that
Now,
make-
keeping in mind, like we talked about before, right now, VFR aircraft are flying over those areas. So it's not as though the people below this route have never heard aircraft departing. They're just right now the VFR traffic.
Yeah,
So-
that makes sense, but it's still, it's not a calculated, it would increase that traffic. Am I correct? So see,
Presumably it
you
would.
and I we live in Prosser, right? So I don't know that I would even, like I said about quantifying, I don't know if the airplanes started going around us or, using that alternate departure, would I even really notice that there's that much less? Because if the one Cessna that keeps circling around this morning, that's super annoying to me, but that's only one aircraft. So, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but I don't know if the board has some official position on this. Maybe we should look into that.
And David, it looks like we've got a public comment. David, do you want to tell us what that comment is?
I wasn't sure if public comment happens before your guys' motion or after. It looked like you were going that route to make a motion.
Well, no, we're going to listen to public comment before we take a vote.
Okay. Just a moment. And this public comment comes from Mary Hetherington. And Mary says, the majority of jets have to file a flight plan, which leads them to a waypoint. For flow, they all depart to truck. The purpose in trying to develop Cigna is to provide an alternative use in good weather conditions. The summer is when we get most of our comments, and the weather is acceptable for many options of arrivals and departures. Please think of the impacts from funneling aircraft, which is what is happening, rather than distributing the overflights.
Okay, and then that's the only comment we had? Okay, Lauren, could you do me a favor? Could you read back the motion? Lauren, can you hear me? Can you read back that motion, please, so we know what we're going to vote on?
Yeah, you had motion to have the board investigate this departure procedure for further. You're going to present it to them that you guys were all in agreement to have this procedure considered by the board. And
Okay.
you motioned and Lynn Larson seconded.
Okay, awesome. So I'd like to, if there's no further comment on it, I'd like to take a vote on this. Can we do a?
I just have one comment, if I may. Hardy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
If this goes to the board, they are going to ask to have a professional organization look at it. Any idea what that might cost?
So we've already done analysis on this departure procedure with AB2X squared, and they're under a service contract agreement from budget that the board has allocated for 2020. So as far as cost goes, it's immaterial to ACAT because we already have this as a project for the board. So I think that the summarizing the materials that I've already got with the consultant may be, 6 hours of staff time and maybe a couple hours of consultant time, maybe less than
Okay.
$1,000.
Cool. Well, thank you, Hardy.
All right, Hardy, can we do a roll call vote on that?
Member Chair Diamond,
Yes.
Member Golden,
Yes.
Member Caldwell,
Yes.
Member Lorenz,
Aye.
Member Rolfe,
Aye.
Member Larson.
Yes.
The other
Okay.
recommendation I would make when it comes to doing investigative type of analysis on this procedure is we would want to engage another consultant that we use for our obstruction survey to do CURPS criteria analysis. And that would really answer many of the questions regarding the OEI climb gradient and terrain obstruction clearance. So those are pieces that are, I'll call it the next level of technicality, but the first level we could accomplish with the contractor that we already work with. So I would just say in two parts, look at the actual notional design, and then you want to look at the TURPS criteria. TURPS criteria analysis is very specialized, and there's only a few people that I know that do that work at a high level. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. All right, so that motion passes. Does anybody need to take a break before we go into subcommittee reports?
Yeah, just a couple minutes.
Okay, we'll just take a few minutes break. So we'll get back at 10:48.
You don't have your hearing aids in, I mean, your earplugs in.
What?
You have earplugs?
Hey, Lynn,
Yes,
is this format working for you? You hearing everything okay and it's
it's
working out?
much better than being in the room with you.
That's what I was hoping. Good, good.
Yeah,
So-
much better because everybody is forced to speak up.
Okay, very good.
I suggest we just do this all the time.
That we don't get the muffins.
Yeah, there's that, well, there's the fat content there too.
That's true. That's true.
Will we have a chance for a committee member to ask for something to be on the agenda?
Yeah, when we get to the reports for member reports.
Okay, because I don't see anything that says member comments.
Yeah, it's generally just in the subcommittees and reports.
Okay.
ACAT member reports and staff reports, and then we have the committees listed there. So we'll to that. Here comes. Let's wait, just give Kat another minute to get back. And I think Stacy's gone.
Hey, David, I got your email this morning about sharing some of the files today for emergency landing.
Yeah.
And we could do that. I could share my screen for that
Okay.
portion.
I think that's a great idea. Great idea.
Yeah.
That on the agenda?
Sorry, I missed that.
It is in the emergency. It's yes, Lynn, don't worry about it. It's part of the map update.
Okay.
So I guess I don't know where Kat's at, but I guess we'll continue going on. So we're going to K5 subcommittee and reports. Here comes Kat now. So we'll go through the committee reports, and then we will go to member reports, and then we will go to staff reports. Okay. So the first 5A is the emergency map project, which has been going on for a while. I'm happy to say, thanks to David Van Quest and Mark and Keely, the map looks fantastic. The content is really good. Joe and I have met with them, and we're pretty positive on where we're at right now. We've got a new draft of this, and David has this that he's going to show in the sharing his screen so you can kind of see where we're at. This is not final layout, but at least you can see the content that we've got from this. David, you want to share your screen and show the folks?
Yeah. Let's see. So, like David said, it's still kind of in pieces right now, but it's going to look something like this. For the map has the different zones that are where it's been suggested that you could potentially make an emergency landing around Truckee. This is the landfill as well. There's a little service road there. And then we've also got on the reverse of that page, there's going to be information on each section of the landfill, or sorry, of that area. So it's got real in-depth, nitty-gritty kind of details for each zone, how you would get to them, sort of based on which run. And then we've also got some drone footage of each zone. You can kind of get an idea of what you're looking at out there, what's on the ground. You guys still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. And the landfill. So that's kind of where we're at. And now we're just trying to figure out how to piece it together and present it, hopefully by the next board meeting.
Okay. Awesome. So would you say this for the three of you, that by next ACAT meeting, we do expect this to be a finished project?
I think so. Seems like the group is pretty happy with the content right now. It's just a matter of figuring out, make the final product.
Okay, we're starting to lose you a little bit there. Joe, do you have any, Joe is also on that subcommittee, any comments on this one?
I haven't seen it, or have I seen it? I saw that the document that David sent around yesterday, but it was kind of it wasn't a completed doc. It was kind of a reformatted look, which looked okay to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically it. So we're just, because we're basically at this point just saying that the content is okay and the content is okay so that they can continue on with their final layout and production plans. So that I'm really happy with it. I think you've all done a fantastic job. Thank you on that one. Any comments on that from anyone or questions? No, and I'm guessing there's no public comment on anything. Okay. So 5B, the Safe Haven project update. The policy for this has been completed. It's thanks to Mr. Covey again. It's now in the hands of Kevin to approve, and then they will decide the rollout of that. Mark, do you have anything you want to, Mark Covey, anything you want to add to that?
No, David, not too much to add to that. Just as you said, it's now resting on General Manager Smith's desk, and looking forward to getting that completed and beginning the sort of marketing phase of that project and seeing where it's at.
All right, thanks for your work on that. I'm happy about that one too. So probably, and would you say, Mark, the same thing, that this by next ACAT meeting, this will be a done deal?
I have firm confidence that by next ACAT meeting, this will be signed, sealed, and delivered.
Awesome. Okay, and then we'll go through, I know, Lynn, you're raising your hand, but if I don't go through everybody in order, you'll
I
get
just
mad.
had a question about that.
I know, but it's not your, I got to ask everybody else if they have
Oh,
questions.
that's right. I'm sorry.
So, Member Golden, any comments on that?
No comment on that. Thank you.
And Member Caldwell is gone. Member Lorenz,
No comments.
Member Rolfe,
No comments.
Member Larson.
Is the ACAT going to see this finished product? I guess that was the question I was asking.
Yes, we'll see this all, each of these things next ACAT meeting.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Okay, so let's go down to the K5C, the real estate guide. This was delayed until beginning of May. We've got Member Larson in virtual meeting mode now. So she, who's also a member of that committee, and Stacy and I will meet and with David and decide what the next steps are on this. We need to revisit where we started with it, because I think we got a little bit off track, and with the lack of meeting options, it got a little worse. So we will start that and then have an update for you in the next meeting. Any interest in commenting on that from anyone? Perfect. 5D, the Truckee curfew modifications staff update. Hardy, is this you? You're muted.
There you go.
There you are.
Yeah, so I finished the policy. Kevin and I reviewed it. He's great with where it's headed. David Mark Covey is developing a pilot survey, try and figure out if we can query some of the pilots, and I'm waiting. Once that gets completed, we'll review the language on the pilot survey and figure out next steps.
Okay, awesome. Anybody have any interest in a comment on that one or question? All right, and then I'm presuming sticking with Hardy on for 5E, the 5901 golf policy update.
Yeah, Kevin and Mark Covey and I met on 5901 golf and also the new simulator to create a policy. We struggled a little bit with equity based on whether the person who's renting the plane or the simulator lives in Truckee, and we believe that constituents who have already paid for those assets should get them at a rate that's different than somebody who comes in from out of town and wants to use it. So the policy draft, Mark and I were working on it last night. It is, I'll call it 95% of the way done, and we should have it completed here shortly. Get it to Kevin for promulgation with the board and final review.
Okay, awesome. I've got a question, but I'm assuming the answer is no, but this is not, this won't be hindered by any FAA policy regarding equal access. Is it-
No, I don't think so. The service offering component is not related to the non-discriminatory clauses that we're bound by with our grant assurances. So that's a good question though, and maybe I'll pose that to Peter Kirsch a little bit, just because it is a district-owned asset. It's probably not a bad idea.
Right. I mean, if you can do that, I mean, what you're proposing, I think sounds like a great and obviously, a smart idea. Question is if you could get away.
Yeah, the reason that makes me feel like it's not bound by that non-discriminatory pricing clause is that it's not necessarily federally entitled. So the FAA has never paid for or contributed any portion of that. That's from district taxpayer money. So that's my thought there. But I'll ask the question anyway.
Okay. Lee, do you have any ask on that?
Well, I had a question just on regards to the simulator that we're purchasing. Has that been completed? I think that would either go to Hardy or Mark. And the reason
Yeah.
I ask, if we do have that unit on station, we might be able to do some of these flights for these procedures in a simulated condition.
Yeah, Member Golden, we do have the simulator in-house now. We're just working on finalizing some of the policy on how the simulator will be managed and whatnot. But it is there. I've used it quite a bit, just in trial and learning mode. And it's pretty awesome. We would be able to use it for some of that practice. It's currently just set up as a single engine simulator, but we may be able to change that, shortly. With a few modifications, but something that you and I can work with together to go and do some of these approaches and departures and whatnot.
Mark, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, Member Lawrence, any comments on Hardy's reports?
Yeah, thanks, David. So help me to understand, Hardy, because it sounded to me like the update was more the cost of rather than the availability of the aircraft. So has the availability issue, kind of COVID notwithstanding, has been dealt with all the parties?
Yeah, we think so. So Mountain Lion and Sierra Arrow are joining forces, which simplifies our role. For the simulator and management of the aircraft, both are going to be handled on a single party agreement to handle those. The CFIs and also Sierra Arrow and Mountain Lion have all kind of chimed in and said, we don't need any additional help. We'll sort out the scheduling ourselves. There is a minor restriction with a 30-day limitation on placing reservations in there, which we hope will not forward book the plane out till October, which will remove that. And then the changes in pricing are driven by the fact that when we did the pro forma on the airplane initially, we didn't understand really the demand for the airplane, and there's a lot of demand now. And so looking closer and refining the pro forma, we want to raise the local rate a little bit and the itinerant rate, basically so that we can reserve the asset for the local taxpayers who help contribute and purchase it.
Okay, thank you.
Member Rolfe, any comments for Hardy? Nope. Member Larson, any comments for Hardy?
Nope.
All right. Then how about member reports? Lee, do you have anything to report?
David, at this point, no.
Okay. And Member Lawrence, anything to report?
Nothing to report. Thanks, Dave.
Member Rolfe, anything to report? No report. And Member Larson?
I have a couple of requests, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time. I would like ACAT to entertain the notion of revisiting touch and goes as being, one of the nuisance factors in the neighborhood. And I think Kat mentioned something this morning about going around and around while we were having this meeting. And I wondered if that was the touch and go. And I know they're pretty annoying on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. Trust me on that one. So I wondered if we could revisit that discussion so we can have an understanding what's going on there and if there are any changes we could make.
Okay, so maybe you could talk to Hardy about specifying what you'd like to put on the ACAT agenda. For
Got
the
that,
next-
Hardy?
Yeah, we'll put that on the agenda.
What the goal of the outcome of the discussion and what you're hoping for as a decision.
Yeah, it's something that we might be able to put in place that would take some of that burden off of the community, you know, for the touch and goes. Okay, the other thing, and this is sensitive, every week, I mean, every ACAT meeting, whether I get to show up or not because of all the things that have happened, I read the material and I sense that maybe not everybody's reading it. And that troubles me because I feel like, why am I reading it if I can get all that information at the meeting and I don't have to read it? So the question is, would it be agreeable to the other members of ACAT to, and this would take some of Hardy's time too, that you read the material, when you have questions, especially the technical ones, if he could get those questions ahead of time of the meeting, so he could say, a member had this question, here's the answer. Is that a reasonable request?
I mean, I personally would say that when the materials are released, if any member of ACAT has a question about it, and Hardy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that they're free to contact Hardy to get clarification. There's no Brown Act issue with regard to a member speaking to Hardy or just speaking to Lauren or any staff member. It's just about speaking to one another. That's the issue before.
Right. You know, I just felt like perhaps some of these questions are coming, they're being generated as he's telling us this stuff when he's already given us the material. So I'm just hoping that maybe we could speed things up by having those questions ahead of time and answer.
Okay, Hardy, it's okay with you if ACAT members email you questions on content?
Yeah, that was Mr. Colantuno, the attorney who talked to ACAT. Recommended that it's good government to understand what you're reading, and when you get into the meeting, you're informed and ready to go. Happy to meet with you or talk to you about any of the material.
Great.
And then, well, I had a question, Lynn. The presumption is that you believe that ACAT members aren't reading the materials, and you said that there was a sense of that. How are you concluding that?
I'm where that's coming from is some of it's really technical. I don't get it. And I'd be really surprised if some of the other members, except for the pilots, are reading that and going, wow, this is really cool stuff. But I don't really, if somebody asked me a question about it, I wouldn't be able to answer it. And maybe it's just my problem. And I'm not assuming, Joe, that you didn't read the material. I'm not saying that at all. It's just that sometimes the questions or the comments don't seem to line up, and it may be just my problem. That's all I'm saying. And I will continue to read it, and I will continue to ask questions.
Right. I think that just the nature of the fact that the six of us, five right now, but traditionally the six of us are here with the interest of a community and an airport, and the airport aspect of things are going to naturally be more technical and require an understanding that we assume the community members won't have. Our job is to make sure that we can explain the technical things in terms that are simple enough so that the community members can understand how they directly impact the community. So that it's not necessary for you, Lynn, for example, to understand what a climb gradient is, just that you understand what we're talking about with regard to community impact. So yeah, I think that's when you see the material. Hardy is fantastic at being able to explain that stuff because he's an experienced pilot, so he can explain that stuff. So I would encourage everybody, as we've done in the past, to contact Hardy or whomever on staff for clarification before a meeting. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
So staff reports, I don't have an order to ask staff. So Hardy, I'll ask you first because you're upper left on the screen.
I don't have any staff reports, except I wanted to mention that the communications master plan is completed, and Mark has worked. I'll let him comment on that. But Lynn had a question about the role of the ACAT ad hoc playing, or what role they played going forward. And I think at this point we're done. We don't have any additional work to do. The plan's complete, and Mark's in possession and using the plan and using the consultant. And I think as far as we know, we're complete. And I'll turn it over to Mark.
Mr. Lamb, anything from you?
Hello. I think the communication plan is working well. We've been working with Aviatrix, having them do projects, not only for me, but we're working on a project with Mr. Covey at the moment. But all in all, I think it's good there. It was a good exercise, a good learning experience. I also wanted to update everybody. We've got about almost $5 million in FAA AIP projects going on this summer. And the first one actually is starting today. So if you see construction on the airfield over by CareFlight, that's the new heliport going in, which will allow for 2 helicopters to park at the same time. And they're also we're gonna be moving that traffic from gate 4, just as a safety issue. I'm going to be e-blasting here shortly after this meeting that hangar tenants going to the Lima, Mike, November, and Papa Rose for the next few weeks are going to be entering the ramp on that west side of the airfield via the K-rail fence that's just to the south of Makerspace, the warehouse project, the warehouse property. So that you'll see that happening, and the next will be the wash rack and the blast pad on runway 29. We did select a contractor for the larger taxiway alpha reconstruction project that's going on from Echo right in front of the terminal building, going west all the way to the run up for 1-1. Q&D Construction was awarded that contract this past week. So lots will be going on with federal funding coming into our community and supporting airport improvements and supporting our local economy. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Anybody else? Staff, Mr. Covey, Van Quest, Keely, anybody else?
Nothing for me at this time.
I have some stuff.
And
Just
Laura?
to remind people, back office staff are mostly working from home with very selective office hours that are reporting to work during the week. So if you need to get a hold of us, email is the safest bet. I am checking the office line voicemail a couple times a day. It hasn't really been active because everyone knows, that we're not there. But if you do leave a voicemail, it's just faster to email us than calling the main airport line. Also, the board of directors are still going through with their spring workshop, which is going on, taking place on May 27th from 1:30 to 4. They're going to be discussing various topics, potential projects. So if you're interested in participating as a public member or just watching it, we'll have the link posted on that agenda that you can just click in and view. It's taking place before the regular board meeting, and that is happening at 4:30 at its regularly scheduled time. Both agendas will be posted at the same time since they're taking place on the same day. Yeah, again, that's May 27th. So put that on your calendars.
Okay, And do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, a second?
I'll second that.
All right, roll call vote, Mr. Bullock?
Excuse me, Chair Diamond,
Yes.
Member Golden,
Yes.
Member Caldwell,
She's gone, I think.
Member Lorenz,
You're muted, Joe.
Sorry. Aye.
Member Rolfe,
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Great meeting. Everybody did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody, very much.
Good job, David.
Good job, David.
Thanks.